CBD processor panel. We were supposed to have me and Nature, Owen from Nature, and Ben Dobson from Hudson Hemp, and the two of them couldn't make it. Now we have David, he's also processing in Long Island. So thank you for coming. So I'll do a quick intro. We'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll open it up as like kind of a Q&A panel discussion. So my name's Allan. I, for the last 9 years, have owned Main Street Farms. We're a certified organic vegetable farm in Cortland, New York. 2 years ago, we started growing hemp for CBD. Last year, we grew, the first year we grew 15 acres, and last year we grew 40 acres. We also built our own CBD processing facility, which is under the name New York Hemp Oil. And then we also have a retail brand called Head and Heel. I'm also the president of the New York State Cannabis Growers and Processors Association, so I wear many hats. So I have seen the CBD thing go, the entire supply chain, the entire industry, including the regulatory side, which has been an interesting ride.
My name is David Falkowski, Open-Minded Organics, Bridgehampton, New York. Started nearly 20 years ago now, attending conferences and stuff like this, and started growing organic mushrooms in my backyard. A few years later, moved over onto a family farmland and diversified into some vegetables. In season now, we do 6 farmers markets a week. We have a farm stand. Through the years, several years ago, we got our 20C license. We were doing food processing, soup stews, pestos, sauces. Last few years, we started doing some herbal and mushroom extracts, some dietary supplements on that realm. And then in 2017, when the window opened up for more applications for growers and processors in the state, we put ours in, and we earned that in early 2018. So we just concluded our second season. In 2020 will be our third. We are certified organic for our mushrooms and our hemp product, and now our finished hemp products by NOFA New York Certified Organic LLC here. We're actively processing.
Yeah, awesome. So, what kind of questions do you guys have?
Does hemp grow well with other products?
So this is a processing panel, so we're trying to not talk about just the growing stuff, but yes, we'll have the session after this, but it does grow well on any diversified, horticultural
like I have
style
blueberries,
farm.
so I want to make sure it doesn't interfere.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the different kinds of processing and what your options are and the differences between the final products?
Okay, sure. So, New York Hemp Oil, we use certified organic ethanol. We're a certified processor. And so there's 2 ways of doing ethanol processing. You have your -40, and then you have your room temperature. And there's less waxes and fats and lipids in the -40 cryo extracts than there would be in the room temperature ethanol. And that, talk about that also. What we do is we make kind of the full spectrum crude oil with our ethanol, and that is what we use for all of our the Head and Heel tinctures and our topicals. A lot of people are also using CO2, like Owen at Nature. They're doing CO2 processing, and CO2 is done multiple different ways. Some people are just pulling terpenes off, or some people are just doing full runs. It really depends on the end product. A lot of the stuff we've seen in the THC market or the CBD, like the distillate, the vape pens, it's really good for making distillate and vape pens and those kinds of things on the CO2 side. You're also ethanol.
Sure, we're ethanol extractors also. I would say this, just a quick one between CO2 and ethanol. Don't think that CO2 in and of itself is a quote-unquote solventless extraction process. It's extremely efficient, so it moves over a lot of those fats and waxes. That crude paste that comes out of those extraction units still needs to be dissolved in ethanol and winterized, which is a thing of imagine you make chicken soup, put it outside overnight, it's winterized, all the fats coagulate, and then they can be filtered off. So don't be fooled there on that. There are a couple other methods that are out there. So New York State requires only food grade solvents or mediums. There's also lipid extractions. They've been adopted by such companies as Palmetto Harmony down in the southeast. So in other words, lipid extraction, you literally take the flour, the biomass, and you put it in oil. It's very limiting. It's not going to pick up a lot of terpenes, and it's not going to get very concentrated. You will see on the marijuana side, and it's not allowed in New York right now, but a lot of these like petrochemical extracts, so butane, propane, LP, all of these, a lot of those shatters and waxes that we hear about on the market, they're made with those. Out on the West Coast, I mean, they really think it's the end-all, be-all.
Yeah, they do like their hydrocarbon extractions. Their hydrocarbons are very good solvent for terpenes, so that's why a lot of the THC people like them. But yeah, New York does not allow hydrocarbon extraction in the extract world, both for the medical marijuana people or for the CBD people.
Why?
I don't know. They made that decision on their own.
You know, they said food grade.
They want everything food grade, and they don't feel a hydrocarbon extraction would be food grade.
That would be more like a commercial grade product. What?
It's very dangerous to deal with. I mean, early on, before there was a lot of regulations and stuff, I mean, people were blowing themselves up. Not to say that a couple big companies haven't blown their labs up that are doing ethanol extraction.
It's a dangerous solvent, and so you need like C1, D1 facilities, and local municipalities have, you know, the fire marshals start getting nervous. So it just becomes a little bit more complicated from that safety perspective.
But to recap, in New York State, I imagine we're basically running ethanol
Or CO2.
or CO2.
Yeah.
How about in processing, there's CBDA and there's THCA, there's all of these other components they're finding out besides just CBD.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that and what it does to your process?
Yeah, so when you harvest your hemp, it's all of the cannabinoids are in their acidic form, so you have its CBDA, THCA, all those things. What turns them into CBD or THC is adding heat. And so even if, you know, you were without getting too crazy about this.
Decarboxylation.
Yeah, so it gets decarboxylated. You can do extractions and keep your cannabinoids in their A acid format. The market just isn't super aware of, like, some people are starting to make THCA tinctures and CBDA tinctures. It is totally possible. Just in extraction though, to when you are removing all your solvents, your ethanol, and from your winterization or from your extract, it's a little bit difficult to keep it a purely acidic compound and pull all your solvents out. It is doable, but that's where, you know, kind of the difference is. And I know there's some health benefits to CBDA and THCA. I just don't think, like all of this stuff, there's not enough research being done.
So I'd say too, also, let's look at kind of this whole THC conundrum for a moment. So we all hear about Delta 9, right? So that's the equivalent of CBD. And we hear about THCA. That's the equivalent of CBD, the acidic forms of these chemicals. So like we were saying, just to recoup, even if I'm repeating things a little bit, I just want to help you guys like understand this clear. So generally speaking, the large part of the CBD, the total potential CBD and raw hemp in the field is in the form of the CBDA, the acidic form. Has an extra little molecular appendage, a little carboxyl group. And so THCA is the same thing. It's got this little extra appendage, the carboxyl group. Through a process of decarboxylation, heat does accelerate it, but decarboxylation is also a degradation process. So things can decarboxylate over time. One of the conundrums also with the acidic forms is they're unstable. So during the process of decarboxylation, so we expedite it through heating, very often through solvent recovery or other things, it drops off this group and it's released in the form of CO2. So as a matter of fact, some folks or processors or maybe people receiving finished product, if they've ever opened something and it's like foamed over, it could have properly been purged of any processing aid, but that's literally the CO2 from that carboxyl group releasing. So also bringing those products to market, they're inherently not stable. Over time, things will decarboxylate and break that piece off. Yeah.
What's the shelf life of the CBD oil then when you're making it, as far as if it's breaking down like that? How long can you sell it for?
So in the raw form, I mean, I haven't done any shelf life studies on the acidic form. I would imagine the more stable away from UV exposure and temperature, it'll stay that way because those are really some factors that cause this. But I mean, shelf life studies, I haven't conducted any.
On the CBDA specifically?
Even the CBD.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. you know, we take a lot of our pointers from like the herbal extract industry, and in that industry, you know, something that's extracted in ethanol has a very, very long shelf life. It's probably years and years in reality. You know, once you put it in a finished product, it's a whole different story, but just the pure raw CBD, you know, a crude is like the black tarry substance, distillate looks more like a honey. Those kept at the right temperatures and out of UV light should be stable for a very long time. Yeah.
Yeah, let's be clear here too, that's post decarboxylated. Are we all clear now? So you have CBDA and largely THCA in the field. At some point it's decarboxylated and it becomes the delta 9 or THC or total potential THC and CBD, and that's what we're talking about, that's stable.
Or I guess it's about the terpenes though. Do you add terpenes back to any of your CBD oil, or is it all just extracted through the extraction process? And does the alcohol, compared to the CO2, you say CO2 you have better terpenes, does it, I mean, I thought that alcohol kind of ruined some of the terpene profile. But it doesn't?
The first part of the question is that no, we do not add any terpenes to any of our products, like back in.
Yeah.
A lot of companies do that.
Yes.
We don't do that.
Okay.
We get all of our terpenes through our ethanol extraction.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those things. The ethanol is pretty good at retaining terpenes. This is one of those things though, it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
If you don't treat your plants correctly and you're not putting in flour or biomass with a lot of terpenes, you're just not going to get a lot back out. And I think that's sometimes a gap of knowledge where people don't really realize that.
But the process doesn't really destroy a lot of terpenes.
The part of the process in ethanol or any solvent recovery, which would be for winterizing for CO2 oil, is adding too much heat to the solvent recovery process, and that's when you're decarboxylating the CBD into CBD. But a lot of those terpenes are very volatile, so they just have lower boiling points. And so depending on your processor, if you want, like we've seen full spectrum oil out there with no terpenes in it because they've kind of cooked them all off because they're trying to run their material so fast, increase their throughput. If you are working with a processor and one of your goals is to retain maximum terpenes, that processor has to have a system in place that will do that for you. That's a question you should be asking your processor, like, let me see your terpene, when you're retaining terpenes, let me see those test results on the crude or the distillate. Because if they're trying to speed you through their facility, they're probably using a lot of heat to fat, for the solvent recovery portion, and then that's where you're going to lose a lot of your terpenes. So,
one of the benefits to CO2, and just to come back,
and that was the final part.
So you were asking about supercritical CO2. So it's the idea that we take this gas and it's compressed, and once we get above 2,500 or 3,000 psi, we start to get like a vapor. Once above, I think we're about 4,000 to 5,000, it actually becomes a liquid, and that's what's passed through the mark, or the hemp and the extraction columns, and that's what acts as a solvent. The beauty is when you release the pressure, the CO2 turns into gas and off gases rapidly. And it gives a CO2 extractor a lot of precision and control here. So many of them can do a terpene extraction, and then they'll go through, and then they'll do a cannabinoid extraction, and then those will be formulated at the end. So inherently, there's almost two ways to look at that question. Do you add terpenes to your product? Have they been, yes, preserved? That's a perfect thing. It's whole, it's never been fractionated. But at one point of the process, have they been reclaimed and then added back in? Or had they been burned off, or was it a distillate where it was all blown over and then they added some other terpenes to replace the native ones?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways to do every one of those steps, and all the processors have their own way they like to do it, and a lot of that depends on their end customers. Like if you're making a lot of distillate and you have a big distillate buyer, if you're keeping all your terpenes in the whole way through batch by batch, for example, your batches are going to smell a little different because they'll end up with different terpene profiles depending on the genetics or whatever. If you have a buyer that wants the same exact distillate every single week of the year, a lot of those bigger facilities are removing the terpenes right out of the distillate and just keeping them separate and then sending in a very kind of homogenized product. And maybe they're using those terpenes for something else, or maybe they've already cooked them off and just don't care to recapture them. So a lot of it kind of ends up depending too on your final buyer. Like what are they going to want? Are they going to want the same exact cannabinoid and terpene profile for the whole, every product for the year, or are they cool with some batch, fluctuations for like, more of a whole plant kind of strain specific extract?
So that's a good point to my question, which is, short of peppering you for the next hour with a lot of detailed questions, what technical resources exist to understand a lot of the background information that go into the science behind this, but also practically the design of a small-scale processing facility?
Oh, that's a tough one. Trial by error.
Yeah,
The
YouTube,
first place is your equipment company. So if you decide I'm going to go with ethanol, every equipment company has their user manual and very basic general SOPs, and like that's the starting on the equipment side. There's an amazing farm out there called Future 4200. So once you get into extracting and you're really trying to dial stuff in, Future 4200 is like, it's mostly THC people, but there's starting to be a lot of CBD stuff on there. That's a good place. And then if you're talking about like facilities design and those kinds of things, I mean,
Go to engineering school.
you gotta find, then you've gotta find either a consultant or a local contractor who has experience in building clean rooms and facilities with solvents and C1D1 or C1D2 rooms, or an engineer who can design it for you. And there's even equipment companies out there who sell the designs with the equipment, and they're trying to kind of now bundle the whole package and talk to your local fire marshals, because it's all, has to be inspected, and every municipality is a little bit different in the way they
So there's not like anywhere in the United States a workshop that you could go to that is about understanding CBD processing or design.
I think Farmer Tom offers some courses on it.
You're going to find stuff that tends to be more in a proprietary or consultation area. And let's just break this for 2 moments too. So in New York State, we're building dietary supplement manufacturing facilities. We're really just that far off of pharma. So you basically need a GMP consultant, and you're going to need a cannabis consultant. So it's not even just one person in one clearinghouse. And just like you guys are here today, that was like a baby step for me a couple of years ago when I got it. You just have to go out there, you have to network, you have to go to trade shows, you have to pick up the phone, you have to travel to facilities, and most importantly, and I had this conversation a few times where people asking about why our friend has this, or we know this company with that type of extraction. The end of the day, and a lot of us are farmers here, I'd imagine, it comes down to what is the product we're making and selling. So, I've been pitched, well, we have this and efficiency, this and that, but if it doesn't taste good, if it doesn't do what the consumer expects it to or meets your specs, I don't care how efficient it is at making isolate, that's not my gig, man. And so you really, you just have to get out there and hit the dirt and experience many of these things. And it's going to take time and money.
Yeah, a lot of facilities visits around the country when you can have access to them, which is hard to do. A lot of conferences, a lot of equipment company meetings, all those things.
I've seen you guys, a few people here. So this is the 4th one in 2 weeks?
Yeah, pretty much.
4 conferences in 2 weeks. It's not that way year round, but you in the back?
Could you talk about dealing with bud rot and other fungal pathogens during processing or before processing?
We're not, as long as, we haven't seen too much of a problem with that in general. So as long as your crop is harvested well and dried correctly, for ethanol, we haven't had, huge issues. We also we use like 1 micron or sometimes half micron filtration. And so through that really small filtration, any potential mold spores that weren't already killed by ethanol that might still be in there would end up getting filtered out. Yeah.
Do they use full strength ethanol or is it diluted?
Well, there's different ways you could do it. The cheap way, if you're not certified organic, is using a diluted denatured ethanol. It's usually denatured with heptane or methanol, which are they're not food grade substances, and the reason they're denatured with that is so you don't have to pay the excise tax. The excise tax of ethanol is twice as expensive as the actual ethanol. And so people then are, removing the heptane through the solvent recovery process and then testing for residuals. A lot of the bigger operations who aren't organic, who need, cost efficiencies, are doing the denatured stuff. For us though, as a certified organic facility, we use certified organic 190 proof sugarcane based ethanol.
You don't dilute it at all?
No, no, you definitely don't want to do that. And so it's really expensive. It's like probably at least triple the cost of a denatured.
The last tote I bought, a 275-gallon IBC tote delivered from the Northeast, was about $10,000. And I just want two guesses from the room based on his math, see if you're paying attention. What do you guys think I paid in excise taxes out of that 10 grand?
Seven?
Yeah, $6,800 went to the federal government. So if anybody thinks they're still trying to figure out how to get paid on this whole thing, I'm sure one of the smart ones up there figured out they're making beaucoup dollars right now on this. And so
Wait, so you got taxed on ethanol?
everybody gets
Everyone.
taxed on any consumable form of alcohol. It's an excise tax, a sin tax.
That didn't come off
Tax
your
it,
ag
yeah.
exemption?
No, there is a program, drawbacks or draftbacks, I forget the name of it, if you can prove, so this is actually widely used in the dietary supplement industry, and also where the ethanol is used as maybe an industrial solvent, so if it's not going for end consumption, it's a processing aid, or maybe if it's in a food product, you can get the majority of that rebated, or you're just exempt from paying that out in the beginning. Many of us right now are a little maybe reluctant to ask the feds for a tax break, where I know you had some experience, you said some folks you knew had applied.
Yeah, so the company we purchased our ethanol from has had hemp processors try to apply for the excise tax exemption. They've all been denied. So
Hopefully that changes here.
hopefully it changes, yes. We're going to try to get it changed, but like you're saying, $7,000 for one tote, if you're using a tote every week of the year, that adds up to a lot of money. So
think about that when you want to do a split with an organic manufacturer.
Yeah, totally.
How much they're bankrolling half their enterprise.
Right, and yeah, the organic processors who are doing ethanol are definitely we're more expensive than if you went to find a CO2 or non-organic who's using heptane. That's just the nature of it.
So you see, like across the state, a lot of there's like over 100 processor licenses, right? But only a small amount of them are actually operating, and some of those processor licenses are held by companies that are worth hundreds of millions, not billions of dollars. So what do you guys see as some of the reasons why those operations have been stood up?
Yeah. Did everyone hear that question? Why are a lot of the there's 100 processor licenses that have been given out in New York State. There's only a small number of those that are actually operating, and the question is, and some of those companies are like $100 million companies that have those licenses. Why haven't they built their facilities yet? And so, we can only guess at why a lot of people haven't done it. From my perspective, it's purely a market thing. When they got those licenses and they did their spreadsheets, kilos of crude oil might have been at $4,000 a kilo. And so they based their numbers on that math. The market in the past 6 months has gone ceiling to the floor, and so we're at floor level probably pricing. People are selling kilos of their oil now for under cost of production because they grew too much hemp and they made too much oil. The facilities were too big, and just to keep the lights on, they're now slowly kind of selling their distressed assets is kind of the best way to put it. And so in New York, we were a little late to the game as in terms of like Colorado, Kentucky, Oregon, and so we're competing with those markets, and we weren't able to catch up fast enough on that market to have enough processors being built. So the issue is really they're not building their facilities because they wouldn't be profitable anymore. And so that's why a lot of these processors have not come and built their facilities. And a lot of times what we've been hearing is there's a processing bottleneck in New York. There's not a processing bottleneck, there's a sales channel bottleneck, because there's just an oversupply of bulk, crude, or distillate right now in the market. So that's the problem. Processors can't keep buying a biomass and making oil that their customers aren't purchasing. That's really the bottleneck that we're seeing out in the open marketplace. Hopefully, once the commodities thing, like it always does, bottoms out and levels out a little bit, hopefully this kind of next year, the supply and demand will kind of be more equivalent. One of the big issues is that, that until the FDA and New York State have much clearer laws, there's just there's a ceiling to the CBD market from that perspective. So I think that's just we're living through a very immature, unstabilized commodity market.
And I think also there was a lot of speculation. So New York is one of the largest markets in the country. So when it opens up, everybody says, oh wow, here's another opportunity to pull a license, we can get it in a big state, we're going to buy it and we're going to flip this. And I really think, obviously besides the economy, the economics of the business, I think really a large, in my opinion, maybe not so humble, I talk too much to be humble, that they were speculating on flipping these licenses, and so they're holding, and they never really had an intention of setting up a facility. We've seen this in other cannabis markets. I mean, in Vegas, the vast majority of growers and processors permits and even dispensaries, they just get kicked around like a rock in the dryer. Very few people are actually setting it up to full production capacity and rolling out a legitimate, robust business. They do like the bare minimum to make it look active, get a valuation, and flip it. And, that's what I think was one of the major factors also. She had her hand up in that.
So I'm wondering if you guys can describe your business model as a toll processor and how you work with growers.
Mm-hmm. So for us, we will toll process for a fee, like a pound input fee. Depends on the size of how much hemp you have, and then we will either give you back, all we make is a crude oil right now, like a full spectrum crude, so we will give that back to you, or we will take that and turn it into products for you, like tinctures or topicals, and then you would take those back and sell them. That's our kind of toll processing model. Do you have?
Yeah, I'm going to expand on it. So we're in a very similar situation. I think really the way to look at this, I've been saying this over and over, this is my message, and I'm sure Allan's as well. Anybody that wants to get in this as a small grower, you don't need to be the next big guy with 40, 60, 80, or 100 acres. What you really need to do is start attending conferences and shows like this, networking, asking around, trying products, and meeting people like us, and start talking about, hey, what is it you want to make and sell? And you work your way back from there. You want to find a processor who has that capability. You want to find a genetics provider that has varietals that meet those attributes. I'm not going to just pick a bunch of Kirby's out of high mowing and say, okay, these are the ones, and then figure out how we're going to make pickles and then we're going to sell them. I'm going to figure out, hey, I got to get my scheduled process for my lacto-fermented pickles. If I'm not going to do it, I'm going to get a processor. What varieties are suitable for this? So this is just like any other agricultural crop where we're adding value for it. You should have a very intimate relationship with your processor. Like you said, what does your biomass look like? This is what we can do with it. In theory, nobody's supposed to have in their personal care anything over 0.3%. So these products, you really should be, and I'm sure this will come down even more and more in 21 with the health department involved. So you'll be soup to nuts with the processor, or you'll have one processor complete one action, and it'll be transferred to another to complete another action.
Right, it would be transferred to a manufacturer or another bulk buyer. Because, technically you're not supposed to be holding on to your own oils because the THC is above 0.3 at that point while it's in process. This has been happening a lot because of splits. Did we talk about splits?
We didn't touch it yet.
Okay, so this has been happening because of splits, and this is a business model that is out there too, is that you would bring your hemp to a processor and you would do a split with them. A lot of times right now I see is 50-50 or 60-40 split. They'll take all your biomass, they'll turn it into oil, and you don't have the cash to pay for that, so they give you back half your oil, and they keep half the oil as like the fee for processing for you. So this way, you grew the hemp, you have it, maybe you have a buyer for the oil in bulk, and you do the split. And that's been very common across the industry in the last couple years, because processing a pound of hemp could go anywhere from like $20 to $30 a pound, depending on the methods and the scale. It can go lower if you're like really big scale. And so if you are growing 1,000 pounds an acre, and like he's saying, kind of start small, if you grew 10 acres your first year and you've got 10,000 pounds, you want to turn it into oil at $20 a pound, that's a lot. That's a couple $100,000. So the industry, no one had the couple $100,000. The processor didn't have it to buy the biomass, and the farmer didn't have the money to pay for processing. So they've come up with splits. And it seemed to be working for the last couple of years, but it all was based on the math when oil was at a higher price point. Now that oil is coming down, the split is a little more difficult, because now what the processor can sell their half of the oil for might only cover the cost of goods on the processing. So, we're a little, as a processor, we're a little hesitant to get into the splits right now, because what are we going to do with more oil that potentially is worth less? So that's now, we're going to have to kind of work that out in the next kind of version 2.0 of hemp in the next couple of years.
I think there's still a little bit of salivation for splits, so I myself, we basically closed down any of that. We were running a 50-50 split at the moment. But there's leverage into the future. So, I mean, we've got growers in the room, we have processors in the room, maybe some people are retailers, but you need that trifecta, the retailer or brand owner. So even if a split is closed, there's still an opportunity to say, hey, well, what if we create this third party where we're supplying their brand? So now you guys kind of become co-producers for this other entity that you brought in, not the processor. Don't expect the processors to be figuring out how for you guys to be making money. We're going to give you a wonderful product that's going to meet your specs, and we're going to enable you, but you need to bring the customers and that cash cage, where are you going to cash out your chips? So think about that. You can do a split based on a business arrangement that they're now co-invested in this other brand or project. It's a great way to mitigate some risk and spread the love around.
Do you think that the cannabis industry is responsible for dropping the price of CBD hemp oil because of their ease of access to GMP and food grade facilities that had already been set up for CO2 or whatever form of extraction?
What we've seen a lot of is the THC people have really small facilities actually, and when some of them started getting into hemp, it was very small and inefficient, which is why kilos of oil were $10,000 plus, or isolate, whatever. Because they were small and inefficient, because they didn't know how to work at the scale that farmers work at. And over the last couple of years, the equipment companies wisened up and started building much larger CO2 equipment and much larger ethanol equipment. We're starting to go to other industries and repurpose equipment from them. That's when the farmers were able to scale up on the hemp side and just create a crazy oversupply in the market, and the processors are keeping up. I mean, there's facilities, so like a THC facility might be doing 100 pounds a day. Now there's facilities around the country for hemp that are doing 40,000 pounds a day per shift. So, it just scaled way faster than I think anyone had really anticipated it scaling. And also, when people got into growing hemp from the THC side, I don't think they really understood when they started finding farmers who were used to corn or soy or large-scale vegetables. They're used to growing like a few hundred plants, but these farmers are like, why grow 1 acre if I can grow 100 or 1,000? And we've seen pivots in Colorado. First year out, bam, a whole center pivot, like 800 acres or whatever they are. And so that's that, and that's been the real, scale of the industry over the last year, and who knows what will happen this year.
My neighbor was saying something about the testing requirements are going to get a lot more difficult this year. I don't know if that's true, but he said they only test for 1 cannabinol right now to get to the 0.3, and then say the next year they may be testing 3 components. Is that something you've heard about?
The total THC. So right now, from the mouth of Christopher Loge as early as last week, Ag Markets. Right now we're operating under the 2014 Farm Bill. Right now they're testing for Delta 9 only at 0.3%. We're going to try and run until October. But Mr. Loge also said all they have to do if they're going to flip is give us 60 days notice. So that can happen mid-season. I mean, I'd imagine we'd hear something sooner than later because they do realize we're all buying seeds and preparing right now. But just know that's out of Ag Market's mouth. They just need to notify us 60 days and it will switch over.
to the 3-part testing?
So what it is, remember how we were just talking about CBDA and CBD, THCA and THC?
Yeah.
So for whatever reason, we don't need to get into the huge backstory, they just decided to say Delta-9, the stuff that gets you stoned.
Right.
At that time, when they picked that number, they didn't really include in the definition, hey, that THCA can contribute to that. So all that THC that's in the hemp flower, right? Decarboxylation happens magically when you light that doobie. So I mean, this is very real. It's not like anybody's trying to like smudge anything around. It's just some language that regulators, legislators, whoever, they just kind of hung their hat on it. It's easy, it's comfortable, it's convenient in this changing landscape. So I think some good vocabulary to use, because this is also a very important thing. Like we're trying to figure out how to use words, unify things. I think we really need to look at total potential Delta-9. Total T, total Delta-9, total potential Delta-9, because that will account for the THCA. And it kind of takes that THCA, another component, out of the conversation, which can be confusing for some people, when you're having simplified conversations. So right now we're just at Delta-9, and with the USD interim hemp rule, if New York State enacts that here, when they decide to do that, it will be total potential Delta-9.
Right, and the way they figure out that is they take the THCA number on your test results and they multiply it by 0.877, because that's the figured out conversion, whether how accurate or not, I don't know, that's the conversion ratio of THCA to Delta-9. So they figure out that potential that it might get you high, and if they think it might get you high above that 0.3 line, that's when it would be out of compliance and an illegal crop. Now, a lot of countries are moving into a 1% total THC range, because 0.3, the difference between 0.3 and 1% still won't really get you high. It's still a very minimal amount of THC, but that arbitrary 0.3 is a killer. And a lot of the varieties that everyone is growing, they're hitting 0.4, 0.5, sometimes 0.6 THCA, which when you convert it down into total Delta-9, it'll be above 0.3, and then you'll be out of compliance. Right. So we're trying to keep New York's testing protocols at that Delta-9 for as long as we possibly can before someone has to convince the USDA that a 0.3 total would be very harmful to the CBD, all the farmers, potentially dangerous for putting people out of business. This year, Hawaii had to burn 60% of its crops for being out of compliance. Utah, I think, and or Nevada, Arizona were like 20-30% of their crops were out of compliance and had to be destroyed. So it's a very real thing. If your state is going to total THC, you're using the genetics on the market and you don't harvest fast enough, or it's a stressful season for the plants, it can come out of compliance pretty quickly. So, did you have?
I was just saying, do you think that are there conversations around raising that limit from 0.3 if they decide to go to a combined total? In the USDA, not really. A lot of people have asked them to raise it to a 1% total THC, but I think that people, it's not a hopeful situation that they will do that this year. Maybe they would do it in the next farm bill or in the future year, but Congress would have to pass that as like a law. That would have to be like, done that way. Right now, the way the farm bill was written, the argument is that when they wrote the language in the farm bill about THC compliance, they left this weird sentence in there that said THC testing must be decarboxylated or other similarly reliable methods. And the people who wrote that, some of the senators from Oregon, they did not mean for the USDA to use total THC and get the DEA involved and do all of that stuff. So depending on how you understand those few words put together, there is an argument that you should not be decarboxylating, or you should only be testing the existing Delta-9 THC. So that's, we'll see what's going to happen with that argument.
So another question, I don't know if it's asked before or not. I worked with a lot of growers who grew last year, and through processing, we're wondering if the processors have seen a difference in the choice in which they've chosen to plant and grow that hemp, as far as a processing or a finished product. Is it better grown? And if you guys have seen a difference in bare soil, on plastic, transplanted, direct seed. I know there's a lot of varietal differences, but have you seen any trends in processing if you have the history based on how people grew it?
Well, it wouldn't be about how you grew it, it'd be about how you harvested and dried it and stored it.
honestly, and milled it or not, bucked it. That's where you would see your most differences. You take the same strain and grow it, plastic, bare ground. That's not so much the issue. The issue is the harvesting practices of, you know, your terpene loss and all of those kinds of things. Yeah.
What would you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, if you don't mind here. So just a couple things that we've seen most recently. You know, we've seen, we'll look at Super Haze, Oregon CBD, right? Some of the finest genetics in the world. We've seen it grown in different regions. Has very similar nose, yield, terpene profile, cannabinoid profile. Grown on bare soil, polyculture, both certified organic, different fertilizer regimens there. So everything was similar there, but the products that went through the same SOPs and the same equipment yielded different products. And a lot of the reasons are, so in extraction, we're concentrating, right? It's a form of refinement. We're removing active or desirable compounds from a substrate, discarding the substrate for further processing possibly, and then that's what we work to formulate. So the biggest differences we saw were, so I'm on Long Island. We have you know, mold, maritime climate, very, very problematic. So we do a lot of big leafing starting in July. I have people out in the fields. Now we only grew 4 acres this year, but still most small guys aren't going to do more than several thousand pounds a hemp. And we're big leafing all the time. So we're removing biomass that now doesn't run through our extraction. So we're yes, increasing the cannabinoid content, but who knows what off flavors, undesirables, or coloring agents, whatever's being extracted from that. So any extraneous matter. So the quality of the output, especially on these true first pass, full spectrum extracts, minimally processed, that output is largely going to be dependent on the input. So obviously the drying and the curing, but also think about, you know, big leafing. I mean, akin to trimming. I mean, to be honest, in a perfect world, you want the finest hemp extract oil? Bring me your finely cured trim flower and I'll blow your mind. But don't expect to bring us hammer milled whole plant, stem stalk, leaf, maple leaves, nuts, hair. We've seen it all. And then, you know, I'm not going to clean that up. If it's hammer mill, we don't even know what's in there. And it's going to have to go through a whole litany of refinement. And every time we refine something, you know.
So to follow that up, we've seen growers, because I've covered farms all over New England, New York. On our farm supply side, we set up over 14,000 acres in the Northeast this year. And the trend that I've been noticing and seeing for working with processors is the trim branch method of trimming branches, not cutting whole plants and drying them in a greenhouse or anything, and giving you that 3 or 4 market choice options. So the early stuff that you're looking for as a processor, you go out there, just get that cured dried flour, get you the best bet. The question we've been seeing is people have been, in that trimming method, seeing better results on plastic culture to reduce upsplash of water in instances to increase mold versus bare ground where that's like a sponge. So that's kind of the second elaboration of my initial question is the folks growing on plastic, unlike Oregon and out west where they don't get the frequent rain and weather events like we do out here or like you experience on Long Island. That media or plastic barrier is helping the health of the plant. You harvest a better product if you're just trimming flower, trimming branches, and drying that way. That's kind of, we want to.
Sure, I think there's a lot of variables here. So we saw one particular organic farmer, Seth Jacobs from Slack Hollow Farm. We've been working together. We have an intimate relationship now. He had a beautiful crop, alley crop, you know, with cover crops. So there wasn't bare soil. So you looked at, you know, what happened here functionally was there was some sort of barrier that prevented soil from splashing up on the leaves. So it doesn't need to be done on plastic. We've heard of all sorts of different types of green manures, mulches, and cover crops that could be your preventative control for that situation.
And even though, so no-till format, right? I just spoke the other day at the no-till conference, I think about 400 acres no-till. The problem with that is the sporulation of your molds. So if you're looking at powdery mildew or downy mildew or any of the molds that go with the plant that decaying organic matter or living organic matter, specifically on clover, which is seen to be relationship and a host between powdery, downy mildew, especially with folks growing pumpkins or cucurbits in that late season. That's some of the education and knowledge that has existed in the vegetable world and has not translocated into everybody trying to learn hemp. So that's just some of those points. There's a lot of people poking out here. We haven't taken all that vegetable knowledge and all that stuff and put it back into this side. So as people are learning and growing hemp organically, that sterile barrier, whether it be that or a weed grass or an annual grass between the rows, it's going to be something that's a better inner material to get the finished product. But still, that thing you said earlier, I think, why we bring that growing method process choice is people planting 3-foot rows doing a combine type or bare ground versus a plastic culture when they're able to go out there and harvest specific limbs or branches and dry them so you have more options to harvest it while trimming the leaf off to get the purest flower in the most oil. That's where that whole interrelation process, I think, new hemp growers need to figure out, is that the way to go?
Well, we plant both on bare ground and black plastic, 5-foot spacing, you know, all the standard veggie equipment. To be honest, we haven't really noticed much of a difference between the two.
But really noticed? Have you run any like statistical tests and to actually find out like the quantitative results of the different growing conditions?
When by statistical tests, what we would do is it's about the yields and CBD percentages. So we have field 1, it's 1.5 acres, it's black plastic, we harvested. What's the average, weight per pound, weight per plant? What's the average weight per plant on field 2 on bare ground, non-irrigated? Oh shit, it was like the same. So why are we going to put down black plastic and then pull it up? We're certified organic, it's all in the landfill, non-biodegradable, tons of drip tape, and then you're still dealing with, we know how to cultivate like smaller crops on black plastic because we can get to the edges. We're not, so what happens when you have hemp on black plastic is cultivating in between the rows becomes an issue, so you're either laying landscape fabric down on all your fields, which is a great way to do it and stop erosion, or then you're going back to planting something in between those rows that you still have to come back and mow. So, if you have a soil that hemp wants to be dry and it wants to be warm when you first plant it. So if you've got a field that dries out quick in the spring and you can get in there and plant pretty early, you might not need black plastic. But if you've got a little wetter field that doesn't heat up so fast and you're not facing, good direction or whatever it is, then you might want black plastic. So when you plant those plants, you get a jump start on your season and you're not waiting till the end of June to plant. So it's really every situation is different. What equipment do you have? What is your scale? And so I think there is a lot of, still a lot of research and a lot of stuff to be done on the hemp side on these topics. Huh? We've also grown, so we did a half of a high tunnel, like a 5,000 square foot. So it was we did 2,500 square feet of hemp in the last 2 years in high tunnels right next to our tomatoes. And it did really well. It grew huge. It grows so fast. It needs more pruning. The plants were literally, our special sauce was taller than our brandy wines, through the rafters. It was crazy. And it's a tall, 30 by 35 by 96 tunnel. And so, 14-foot peak or so. It does great. We actually had a lot more problems though with powdery mildew in the tunnels because of all of the same reasons with tomatoes. And so that on itself probably wasn't worth it. Our yields in the tunnels, we didn't really take too good a care of the plants, like pruning and staking them up a little bit. The yields were better, but again, it depends on your size. If you're a small craft grower and you want a perfect, flower, maybe the tunnel is your way to go. But if you're a little bit more in that, 10-acre range, there's no point that we've seen to grow also in a tunnel and bigger acreage out in the field.
This might tie a little bit into the cultivation thing,
Yeah.
but still preparing for processing.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally, so a couple of years ago, there was one of the great hemp conferences up in Albany, and the guys came out from Kentucky. One of the best things they ever explained to me out of the beginning that helped me start to figure out my plan and my system for my farm was they said, there's a difference between an agricultural model and a horticultural model. So, marijuana, boutique cannabis, has been launched on a platform of growing in big grow bags, maybe in greenhouses, but up and out of the soil. well manicured, trimmed up to avoid splashing and stuff. I mean, you look at any modern indoor marijuana grower, a lot of the outdoor ones, where they grow the cannabis sequoia, where 2 plants, maybe 3 would fill a room like this. Like that's a horticultural model, high intensity. You're taking good care of it, but I've seen it with my own eyes. I mean, out of one of these big plants where you could fit 4 in this room, they were getting 15 to 20 pounds a plant of high quality flower. That's not even all the popcorn stuff. So you could grow 4 plants and grow 5 plants in a space this size and grow 100 pounds, and 2 people could take care of it. Or you could grow them out in a row in the field, and both of them are going to have their labor issues, more or less here. They're going to have their own disease and pest issues. So you really need to figure a model. There's not like something we can research and say this is the one that's going to work for everybody, because everybody's going to be doing something different, trying to leverage to have a different product or angle at the market.
Right, and a lot of times when we tell people, growers who ask us who want to get into hemp, like, do the thing that you're already doing. If you have a smaller market garden and you're growing on landscape fabric, you can still continue doing that. You don't have to all of a sudden go out there and buy tractors and plastic layers, and all of a sudden get into this whole new style of farming with different labor, different equipment. Start with do what you know, grow what you can, be reasonable with it, and then you kind of learn from there. Obviously someone who's used to growing 1,000 acres of a commodity crop like corn or soy is going to grow 1,000 acres of hemp, because that's what they know, and they run through with their combine and it's harvested in a few days and it's wet baled and sent off to the processor, because that's what they actually know how to do, and so they continue to do that. So it's all going to be like what your starting point is.
And that's where the similarities that you just talked about earlier, where the farmer's looking to make this the most profitable scenario, looking at their research and starting out on the scale. The row crop guy who knew how to plant corn or soybean or something, row crop, and plant it and harvest it wet. That's the same thing that you say, that's the worst trash that you want to process out here, because you have to take everything out that doesn't give you pure oil. So you're processing 4, 5, 6 times the amount of biomass. So my process question, which is something for people to think about, is if you as a processor could pick the ideal flower to go through, and us as a grower would be looking at that, what recommendations would you make for both harvest techniques and planting strategies that would give the best output to you?
It's not about what we want at the end of the day. It's about what the end buyer wants, whether it's the customer or the brand manager or the product development person. Because if they want super cheap Amazon products with isolate and they want a lot of it, then that's a whole method that you got to work back from. And I think David was saying before, you're really starting with the end product. Because obviously in my ideal world as a small organic grower, we only make certified organic, full spectrum, whole plant extracts with using beautiful flowers. But that's not the whole market. That's like the craft beer market. There's the Budweiser market. So it's really going to just depend on what market. Are you trying to hit both markets? Are you 40,000 pounds a day? If so, that wet combine stuff is perfect. I mean, it's cheap and it's crappy, but it's going to make you a ton of isolate every single day that you might want to sell to a huge brand like L'Oreal or Pepsi when they get the CBD. But if you're like us and you're selling at your local farmer's market and you just want a really good product, then you want a whole nother thing. So it's really not about the processor per se, but it's about your end buyer and choosing the right processor to fit your requirements. So I think that, like David was saying, it's a 3-way conversation between the grower, the buyer, and the processors to make sure that the end person gets what the end person expected to get. And so I think that's where the market is just developing. People are only understanding that. And it's the same with vegetables. Are you selling heirloom tomatoes at the farmer's market for $6 a pound, or are you growing green paste tomatoes to be machine harvested for something else? So I think that's all those variables have to kind of come into play on that.
So let me turn that question around. And if you know what the end buyer wants, do you have protocols you can give back to the grower so they give you what you need?
Oh, absolutely. If we had end buyers come to us and say, we want the highest quality certified organic full spectrum oil made from only top flower, no leaf, nothing, totally de-waxed, winterized, blah, 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 whatever specification, and I had a grower that I was like, that's the one who can actually pull this off, then I would go to that grower and I'd say, hey, I need this much for this customer, this is their specs, can you meet that requirement?
So ultimately, you're then still relying on that farmer's individual knowledge to produce that product rather than trying to have a standardized practice that you could give to other growers so that, you know, like the building of this knowledge base is I think what he's trying to get at is that, you know, no matter if you're growing 1 acre or 5, there's some things that we could all know that really would help everyone out.
A good processor should be able to give the grower a lot of the knowledge. A good processor won't go to a grower who doesn't have experience to get this done. I'm not going to go to a brand new grower and give them crazy specs on high-end flower with no curing facilities and expect they're going to pull this off in year 1 no matter how much I tell them. So, you know, it's just like if a restaurant chain comes up to my farm to buy carrots, there's a whole series of specs that they're going to need that they're only going to choose me if I know how to grow to meet their specs. They're not going to teach me how to farm. And so I think there's a lot of room in this huge spectrum. If they wanted isolate, then I'm going to go to, you know, huge farm, got corn choppers, have wet balers, and we have dryers, and we're making a crop for isolate on so many acres. So I think, and there's always going to be knowledge transfer across all of the people involved in the relationship, and you know that's why it's a relationship, because you've got to be talking, you've got to be working together. You're not going to make a phone call on May 1st and say, I need this much product, all right, bring it to me on this day. Like, you're in constant contact with that person, you're checking on their crops, you know, they're visiting your processing facility, like it's an open dialogue the entire time.
I think the key here really is you're going to develop an intimate relationship. You know, there's multiple people here involved, unless you're vertically integrated, and even then you're going to have even more people involved because they're going to be the customers you're serving. It's a lot more mouths to satisfy.
Yep, and there are people who have contracted with other farmers, like Kaylin, who went out there and said, all right, Kaylin had 10 farms that grew for him, or 15, and you had to teach them basically how to do it.
Yeah, but there's a huge vetting process. I mean, you know, the vast majority of farmers are not equipped to grow in this model, especially if you've never grown a crop before. In my opinion, don't even think about it. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and to produce a high-quality product, you have to have mostly everything go right, and it's all about preparation, field preparation. A lot of people have this idea to put, you know, hemp on land that they're not using, or it's unproductive land, and that is a recipe for disaster. And it's all about field prep. If, in our experience, if it's not, you know, field that was, you know, prepared in the fall for the next season, there's a lot of issues. A lot of these genetics are very finicky in terms of their nutrient uptakes based on the pH tolerance, and also the equipment that a lot of growers have really aren't equipped to prep the soil correctly. We found that, you know, loose tillet of at least 8 inches is key for quick establishment of a plant. So there's a lot of variables. You know, I think there's a select few amount of growers that are really equipped to produce a very high quality crop and bring it in, harvest it, and dry it to spec.
Yeah, and actually, technically, the next workshop was supposed to start, I don't remember what time, 2:30 or 3? I don't remember. 3, but it was
dry to spec.
It was all about craft growing, I think, and the person teaching it couldn't make it, and so we can come back and take a break and come back and talk about some of those more growing topics with us if you guys like, or do it as an open discussion or whatever.
There's a lot of information there.
There is. So, but back to the processing part, because I think only got 15 minutes left or so. Is there any more like processing side questions?
In your opinion, in your experience, what do you think the best temperature is for decarboxylation to keep all your cannabinoid terps?
That's a long.
That's proprietary,
yeah,
buddy.
that's a long. It took us 8 months to figure that out. We're still working on it. Poor advice from many people, and poor advice from equipment manufacturers, and it's That's where you get into extraction as an art form. Some extractors out west consider themselves artists, but that is really where you get into, you know, that's your like knowledge of your team.
So really, the answers to the real questions that we have, we can't get because.
Well, I mean, we're not going to teach you how to run.
Well, that was my
extracts.
question earlier.
Yeah,
You know, it's like there's some basics to this that need to be baked into the industry because it's not everybody has access. That there's proprietary stuff which I totally get, intellectual property, trademarks, patents,
Yeah.
etc. But there has to be some baked-in basic information that starts to help people understand. And you know, just to kind of point to Allan's comment a minute ago, you know, if there are specifics about how to prep a piece of ground for good hemp production, that should be baked into these conversations. That shouldn't be proprietary.
That's baked into this entire conference. I mean,
Well,
holy.
no, I get that, but
like every
his comment
vegetable.
wasn't nobody knows how to do it.
Well,
I
that's
didn't say
because
that at all. I said it's not about just knowledge. It's about equipment. It's about
Right.
access to labor. It's about access to capital. It's way beyond knowledge, and you know, it also has to do with, as a grower, no matter what you're growing, and you know, the access to equipment and access to capital in general. And there's a lot of information that is proprietary and will continue to be proprietary, and that's any industry. That's any industry at all. I mean, I'm also in the wine industry, and you know, there's a lot of processes on the growing side, on the processing side, on the winemaking side that you will never have access to because that winery that's how they make their money.
Right.
To give you an answer though, there is a simple answer to the question would be slowly bring your crude oil up to 120 degrees Celsius and in approximately 4 hours. Agitate readily so you don't get the muffin of death. Okay, you'll see that's that CO2 coming through a viscous fluid. It's you know the muffin of death I'm talking about. And in about 4 hours, and when there are no more small bubbles being released from the solution, that means no longer a CO2 gas being off-gassed, and that would complete decarboxylation. So in a nutshell, that's the basic. So the proprietary stuff from there is how do we ramp up? What levels do we hold at? Are we doing it under vacuum or not? So I don't mean to withhold, but 120 degrees Celsius for 4 hours until there's no more small bubbles.
You know, and I just want to be clear on where I'm from. I totally get proprietary stuff. I mean, I've been in the Apple world for 35 years, and I get that from the patent and trademark side of the equation. But what you just said right there, that's really critical for me to understand just the foundational part of it. So where do I start?
Yeah,
Future 4200.
that knowledge is all over the internet. It's on every YouTube video. It's on every forum. Like that's what we're saying before. Like that knowledge is, and your equipment manufacturer will tell you that knowledge. If you're going out there and buying solvent recovery systems, extraction systems, they'll even come to you, install it, and train it for an extra, a few $1,000 and give you those baseline SOPs. And then you figure out how you want to maximize that equipment, and then the rest of the stuff, which is really what we're talking about. But that baseline stuff is all out there. And when it comes to farming, this whole conference, all of the vegetable field day intensive, or the half day intensive on cultivation, cover cropping, and this whole conference is priming any good hemp farmer. And like these are just very specific things, but the rest of the show and the talks are really where, if you're going to scale hemp and you're going to do it well and you're going to be a really good grower, that's what then you should be in those workshops learning how to cultivate vegetables at scale.
Well, yeah, and you can buy books. You can go to Barnes & Noble and buy a book on how to grow cannabis, right? And there's knowledge all over the internet in all their forms. But applying that knowledge to a specific situation and then acting on that comes from experience. There's no substitute for experience. There's no way to get around it. It's going to take you years to become a good cannabis grower.
And also, maybe I'll just put out like one caveat. I was just entered in this conversation under the presumption that we're here as processors in New York who have been actively processing and talk to you to enable you to be successful growers. We didn't really find out if anybody's looking to become a processor or building out their facility. So just to let you know, any of my perspectives here, it's operating on the presumption that you guys are growers who are looking to get into this, and we're trying to begin that relationship and not necessarily teach you how to be extractors. There are conferences and seminars that are much better suited for that. As I said before, I've spent a lot of money, I'm sure as Kaylin and Allan have, I mean, tens of thousands of dollars scooting around this country, sitting in rooms like this, and it doesn't come all in one scoop or in one flavor.
And you have to fail to learn. And spend a lot of money to do that.
Yeah.
Before we started, set up our extraction business, we traveled all over the country trying to find answers to our questions, and what we found when we went out was there were no answers. We really had to do it by trial and error, and the people who run our lab did not come from a lab setting. They're not chemists. They came from the Peace Corps and they were teachers. You know, they applied themselves. They are obsessed with it. They read Future 4200 every day. They're on forums and they're always trying to improve. And you know, our first few batches were not great. We've learned over time through that trial and error how to do it, and you don't need to have a chemistry background in order to do that. We had a background in farming and we were able to figure it out, but it takes, as a lot of products do, it takes like an obsession and a commitment to the product to really go through all of the learning. It's a steep learning curve for sure.
Mm-hmm. Obsession would be a great word. But yeah, and our people in our lab not only have the R&D, the money we've spent on third-party testing is insane alone, just to figure out how we're getting the best terpene profiles in our oil. Like that question alone, I mean, we're still working on it, you know. So it is a long process. And luckily, if we are having farmers grow for us, we can help them on the farming side because we're also farmers, and the growing and the curing to give us what we would then need. So, any more processing type questions?
As far as like organic and processing, I talked to you about this the other day a little bit, but as far as a processor and being certified organic, does it increase the price of your product if it's certified? Do you guys have to be certified as processors to make it certified?
Yes, you do. So we have our facility gets inspected on the extraction and the bottling side to be certified organic handlers. So you have to be a certified organic farmer. Yeah, then you have to be a certified organic processor handler. I don't know, maybe I'm using the wrong words, Lauren.
No, you're doing great.
Yeah, and then you can have a certified organic product, but the entire supply chain needs to be certified organic products, processor, bottling, ingredients, all of it.
So if you're finding a processor that's like you actually making the product too, you would have to have all those processes certified.
Yes. If you were a certified organic grower and you wanted back a certified organic finished product, you would need to find someone fully certified. And it's you got your due diligence on that. Look at people's certificates. There's a lot of people in the country that, we're organic processors. It's like, you're USDA certified? No, we just follow organic methods.
Right.
And it's like, aren't you using hydrocarbons? Like, is that even certifiable? Like people they don't even know what the word means. Everyone just throws it around. So you definitely got to do your due diligence on that one.
And the level of, again, the intimate relationship. Should you work with the processor? So I was working this with Kristen earlier, where we're extracting and bringing down to a finished product for a grower. I'm manufacturing it. So on my lab, that's on my organic certificate because that's a product I'm manufacturing. So you got to remember who you're laying in bed with here. So you're intimately related here. Your product that they're making is on their certificate. I mean, you want to really trust these people and set yourself up for long-term relationships.
If I could just add, if you want your product to be certified under your brand name, you will also have to apply and do your own paperwork with your processor to get your name put on their certificate. So there is a lot of paperwork.
On their certificate or yours? Yes. I mean, as far as the grower, you're certified, but then you have to get on their certificate for the processing?
Yes.
It depends if you're private labeling or if you are.
Yeah, so I mean,
Lauren can answer this question.
If you're a grower, your farm needs to be certified organic, and you need to get hemp on your certificate. If you're also a processor, you can if it's the same business, it can all be on one certification. If you're actually operating separate businesses, then you have to have two separate certifications.
Yeah, but Lauren, what if he's a grower, I'm an organic processor, and I take his hemp and then I give it back to him in a finished tincture bottle?
With his label?
With his label.
Yeah, so then you don't need to be certified as a handler. because
Only
you're
out,
using him as a co-packer or a private labeler.
Right.
But
So
we
we don't,
still have
so
to
it's just
get,
a grower and the processor being certified and can have a certified product.
Yeah, yeah.
Once the label,
Not the
don't the
handler being-
we
labels
still had
have,
to get their labels certified
Mhm.
and
Approved.
approved, and we had to fill out paperwork with their business information on it in order to be able to have their labels certified.
Yeah.
You just need to give, like a private label agreement saying that you're,
That's what she's talking about.
that's what she's talking about. Right, so you're not adding them to your certification, you're making sure that your processing labels are all approved.
That product's on your addendum, or it's on your certificate that it's approved, that you made that certified organic product.
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So maybe we are saying the same?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're saying the same thing.
They have to design their labels, we have to send those to our
Yes.
certifier and get them approved.
Yep, that's right.
The moral of the story here is, you want to make sure you can have a relationship with somebody. If you shop around, go out of state, and they go out of compliance with their organics, your product can be recalled. You get where I'm going when I'm just talking about this intimacy. You're intrinsically entwined with their business. It's not just like, hey, you're in and you're out and you're done.
Right.
There's deep interconnections.
Yeah, and vice versa. As a processor, which is what we are concerned about with private labels for people, we don't want to get your label approved. All of a sudden, we send you X amount of cases of a certified organic thing that we made. 2 months later, you've switched your supply chain to another company, but yet your labels are the same. They're certified organic. That leads back to us, and all of a sudden you're not sourcing from us because organic oil is expensive. You've decided to cut corners and still use the seal. Like, crazy shit happens in this industry. There's a lot of scammers out there, and so you have to also then be careful who you're doing business with on the entire supply chain. So, all right, are we at time? I hear bags. 2:27. One more with 3 minutes. Technically, one more question, or okay, one more.
Sorry, those couple of those terms like winterized and de-waxed. Maybe I missed that.
Yeah. So winterized oil would be either extracted at cryo, like -40, -60 temperatures to leave the fats and the waxes in the hemp. Or some people are pulling those out after extraction through freezing the material and then filtering the waxes out. That's a de-winterized oil. If you're going to make a vaping kind of product, you don't want fats and waxes and lipids in your oil that you're going to be smoking or vaping. Or other people are using the whole plant and not winterizing and leaving the fats and waxes in their products and all the way through into tinctures or topicals. Is that?
Yeah, winterization.
Yeah. All right, so I guess we'll meet back here in half an hour and just talk about.
Is it 15 minutes or 30 minutes?
All right.
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
We'll meet back in 30 minutes and talk about the growing